Hello everyone. How was your day so far? I hope you've enjoyed your morning. This is our first day back after half term. Annie, I wish. Bank, if you're watching this on demand, thank you for joining us, and we appreciate you spending your next hour with us with the Head Teacher Chat webinars. I'm Lucy, in case you haven't met me before, and I'm really delighted that we're here today, and we're going to be talking about something really, really fascinating. So please do grab a notebook and pen whilst you're waiting, and ready to take notes, because I think you're going to have loads of ideas. So this is going to be a great session. If you haven't downloaded our app yet, you are missing out on a treasure trove of support that could be on your iPad or your phone. We've got all the latest updates from Ofsted, DfE and more, plus tons of downloadable leadership templates and specialised online learning tools designed specifically for you by us, experienced school leaders. And there's so much happening in the community right now. If you're not keeping up with it, please do check every now and then, because you might be missing out. And today we're going to be exploring a challenge that is high on the agenda for every inclusive leader: how to effectively identify and support students with SEND or speech, language and communication needs. And we're going to be looking specifically at the power of diagnostic tools and baseline assessments. As a former SENCO myself, I know how important this is, and I'm really pleased that today we're going to be joined by the lovely Annie. And Annie is a former secondary English teacher with over a decade of experience of teaching in the education sector, has served as a curriculum leader and a whole school literacy coordinator, and now works with Cambridge, helping educators unlock student potential through data-driven teaching and learning guidance using the Cambridge Insight baseline assessments. So you guys are all in for a treat today. Hello, Annie. Good to meet you.
Thank you so much, Lucy, and thank you for having me. It's really lovely to be here, and as you say, talking about a kind of perennial issue, but that kind of keeps coming in and out of focus, and obviously is very topical at the moment following the recent white paper, which we'll talk a little bit about today.
Usually, I'll hand over to you, and then at the end, if anybody has any questions, please do put them in the comments. Myself and Annie will do our best to help you today. Use our knowledge. You've got our time today. If you've got questions or difficult situations you're going through, please do tell us. Let's see if we can help each other. I'll hand you over to Annie. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, so yeah, just as Lucy said there, I'm a former secondary English teacher, whole school literacy coordinator, now working for Cambridge University Press and Assessment, specifically with Cambridge Insight, which I'll talk a little bit about in a moment. It is a suite of baseline assessments. And effectively, I now work developing those assessments, particularly the reporting of the results out of the end of it, and how we support schools and teachers to effectively interpret and then utilise that assessment data. And that's also a key area of my research work as well, where I'm looking at kind of teachers' levels of data literacy. And as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about how baseline assessment data can support us in trying to work towards meeting the needs of our special educational needs learners. And I'm going to frame that within the recent SEND reform announcements, which stresses the need to offer universal SEND teaching. I will pop my camera off just so you get full screen coverage of the slides, but I'll come back on at the end for any questions you have. So please do pop them in the chat, or be ready with those at the end. Very happy to answer as many of those as I can. Okay, right, so as so many of us will know, special educational needs provision has been the focus of a recent DfE white paper, and this was prepared in response to what the document refers to as a system which has let down children and their families. And that document intends to refocus system efforts on what it's saying is about early intervention and joined up education and health services. Now, there's lots of detail, as you might expect, in that paper, and I think hundreds, probably thousands of opinions out there about how effective these recommendations will be. But I just want to hone in on what the proposed sort of structure of support is that the paper is recommending. So you can see on screen some content I've lifted straight out of that white paper about what that paper is terming the universal offer. So that's the support for all children. And that universal offer, that's a set of guiding principles which positively impact all learners, not just those with special educational needs. And we've got reference here to all the things that you would expect a school to be wanting to offer, safe and positive school cultures, high quality teaching, inclusion principles, high expectations from leadership around that inclusion planning and that support. Now, the white paper then details how there are going to be other levels or layers of support. And again, this figure is taken straight from that white paper there. And this is about what we might offer to those children for whom that universal offer might not fully support. So we have these targeted and targeted plus levels where we're hearing about the introduction of a digital individual support plan for students, and that's going to form the basis of the support. We can see there's sort of reference in that diagram there to involving parents, maybe getting some input from education and health professionals at the targeted plus level, but that school age children are supported through their school and that kind of support base there. And then they're retaining the EHCP in the specialist support layer for those learners who are going to require specialist support, and that might include alternative provision options as well. Now, all schools are different in the UK and context is everything. I have been lucky enough to work in schools which have effectively had these models in place. There has been, a focus on quality first teaching, a universal offer. There have been kind of layers of support with individual support plans and obviously EHCPs for those who require them. And I think if you're like me and you've been lucky enough to work in schools that are organised like that, you know that the system, despite that structure and those efforts, is still overwhelmed. And so it strikes us really that universal offer, as it has been for a long time now, certainly since I've been in teaching, which is over a decade, it's really critical to ensuring the identification of those needs as early as possible, because we need to ensure that appropriate interventions can be put in place with enough time to really impact on student outcomes. And having spent my time in secondary schools, that time is really critical. Diagnosing somebody with a significant need that is a barrier to learning in year 10 doesn't give me a huge amount of time before I'm preparing them for those all important GCSEs, which in this country really are the access level onto something new. And we can't always determine what interventions are going to be needed in advance. Special educational needs don't always very neatly arrive at the beginning of a child's educational journey. They don't always show up in reception. And so there's always this kind of shifting nature of special educational needs as well that we have to think about. And so we have to have a way to assess, and a way to assess routinely and appropriately across a broad spectrum of students. And that's kind of what we're going to focus some of our discussion on today. Now, that message about a quality first, universal offer of teaching to all students, as anyone who's been in education more than a year or so will know, is not new. We've always known that high quality teaching and learning, positive learning environments and specific targeted interventions have long been the key to effectively supporting all students, including those with special educational needs. I've taken the summary points on the screen there from the Education Endowment Foundation research, which was conducted back in 2020. And I'm pointing to them again as another set of principles which are really crucial to this universal approach. And again, quite high on the list here is this sense of being able to assess to identify student needs. And I like the word here, I do really like is the focus on the holistic understanding, having an overall view of students' capabilities and experiences. Now, within that paper back in 2020, they referred to the graduated assess, plan, do, review approach. Very, very commonplace in schools, in all the schools I've worked in. I'm sure lots of you are still using that in your schools now. If you're not familiar with it, that approach advocates for assessment being quite regular, in whatever form that takes. It might be a formal assessment that students sit down and do, or it might be things like observations. And the actions arising from those assessments, again, whatever form they take, need to be routinely reviewed for impact, changes implemented as appropriate, but that assessment information really should be communicated appropriately with staff to empower their decision making. And this is where baseline assessments kind of come into the picture, because the assessment of needs in a holistic way, in a way which enables ongoing monitoring, is really critical to this principle of early intervention. Because as I said, we know not all educational needs present themselves nice and neatly with a linear progression, and children don't come to us with a diagnosis and a set of strategies that will work all the time. So implementing a robust and ongoing assessment plan is really, really critical to our success here. And taking a moment to just pause and sort of look at that special educational needs landscape a little bit more, again reinforces the idea that it is in this universal offer, this quality first teaching space, where the bulk of our work is going to continue to take place. That white paper has not necessarily shifted the landscape all that much in its recommendations there. So in January 2025, the DFE reported that 5.3% of students are on EHCPs currently, and that's already a big percentage who are going to largely continue to require a specialist level of support, and that 14.2% of our student population here in the UK require some kind of support outside of an EHCP, but beyond what might be termed a universal offer. Support that schools and teachers are expected to provide. And yes, maybe this government will find some more money, or there might be some more coordinated services, but I think the reality is that much of that support is going to rest with schools and teachers. And when we look at those headline figures in a little bit more detail, we can see that our students with EHCP, so that 5.3%, they're predominantly trying to navigate autism spectrum disorder or a speech, language and communication need. So those are our kind of top occurring or most common need types for children with EHCPs. And if you're looking at the graph, those are the students represented by the kind of dark blue bars there. When we look at those students without an EHCP but who are receiving special educational needs support in schools, they're represented by the orange bars on the graph. We can see that the most common need type here is, again, speech, language and communication needs. But then we also have social, emotional and mental health needs alongside moderate and specific learning difficulties as well. So if we just think a little bit about those needs there and about the assessment of those, we can see that we're faced with a pretty tall order in schools, because an assessment for ASD is very different to one for a potential social, emotional and mental health need. And yet it is these assessments that are the crux really for this early identification and early intervention to help students really thrive in our schools. Now, as anyone who works in education knows, special educational needs, if we think about a secondary school, students aren't always arriving with those. So not only do we need that assessment of a range of needs, but we need them regularly to catch those students who might not have been presenting for us last year. So what we really need is a two-step approach to assessment, which is kind of detailed on the screen there. We effectively need a first broad assessment, a screening assessment of skills, but also well-being, the kind of test that will alert us to potential academic or well-being needs across all learners, because we don't know who might end up presenting for us this year or in future. And then we would have a second layer of assessment, which would be about diagnostic assessment for those where we suspect more pronounced needs that will require specific or targeted support. And of course, there are students coming to us who have had those diagnostic assessments, and that's great. That's kind of one less assessment we need to conduct potentially. But having that screening approach is really a kind of catch-all approach, which is critical to making sure we can support all of our students effectively. And this is an approach that we have seen supported by the DFE elsewhere as well. So one example being in the reading training for secondary school teachers that was launched by the DFE and Professor Jessie Ricketts from Royal Holloway and her team. I think it was last year, actually, early 2025, who again advocated for a universal support for all readers and then targeted support for those readers who need it, with those needs being identified first through a reading screening test and then followed by specific diagnostic assessments as appropriate. But with budgets not stretching as far as they need, a potential increase in special educational needs and less time and bandwidth in schools for the research and investment in new assessments. I think any SENCO or staff member in school trying to establish suitable assessment programs for the early identification of needs could absolutely be forgiven for wanting to pull their hair out a little bit at times. It is a really, really enormous task. Now, baseline assessments of the kind that Cambridge Insight develop, they can act as screeners in this context. They can be a great broad first assessment of those holistic skills because they can assess the skills that a child needs for their curriculum learning, those skills that underpin all curriculum learning on that academic side, and they can also provide wellbeing checks as well. So having those two together enables a really broad understanding, a holistic understanding of the needs of all students. And because of benchmarking against quite a wide national data set for those academic cognitive tests, and because of benchmarking against your class comparisons in a wellbeing check, you're able to identify results which are outside of the typical assessment performance for your context specifically, to then interrogate those results further, combine them with your wider knowledge of each child to really determine if further diagnostic testing is going to be needed, or whether a tailoring of that universal support is going to be enough, will be appropriate. And you're able to kind of confidently screen in that way because what baseline tests do is cover those broad academic skills that are required for any curriculum learning. Okay, so even though we might not have some geography questions in this particular test, we can determine how capable a child might be in their study of a geography curriculum. And that's because these three areas are kind of literacy, which at the secondary stage is very much focused on vocabulary, mathematics and non-verbal skills. These are the things that need to be in place and that come together and accurately kind of predict future outcomes. So when we talk about vocabulary at the secondary stage, a student's competence with vocabulary is a proven indicator of their future outcomes across all subjects. And we test that through synonym questions like the one you can see on screen, through sometimes sentence context questions. So that would be where a sentence would be provided with a word missing, and then you would choose the appropriate word from a list to fill that gap. And where appropriate, our tests will also offer picture vocabulary tasks. So this is where a student can use the image on screen to identify the correct word from a list. And those would be presented where English language or vocabulary capability is very, very low. In mathematics, that's tested through a range of different questions which are focused on the kind of broad areas of mathematics teaching, so number, algebra, measurement, geometry, a little bit of statistics, which might include some probability there too. And then, as I said, we have this third module, this non-verbal reasoning, and this measures a student's analytical skills. That's their ability to make meaning from pictures and shapes by recognizing patterns, by matching and understanding 3D visualizations. And that's a really important part of identifying academic potential. especially if a child is as English as an additional language speaker, or if they have a significant literacy need, because a lack of fluency in the English that might be required to access the vocabulary and mathematics questions can affect their score in those modules. And so actually we can see potential through the non-verbal tasks, even if the vocabulary and the mathematics modules don't necessarily convey that level of potential. Now, I think it's important to note that the vocabulary and mathematics modules in this kind of test are what we call adaptive. So the questions given to the child will adjust depending on whether their previous answer was right or wrong. And that really, just for you as a school, ensures a greater level of accuracy in the result. And it's able to do that in a much shorter period of time, because students aren't needing to spend time on questions that they absolutely can do because they're really easy, or conversely, questions they really can't do, as happens with flat tests, where sometimes we find, lower ability students tapping out around the middle of the test, for example. So that's a baseline assessment that would look at your cognitive and academic kind of side of the coin. But we'd also need to be looking at wellbeing checks and supporting our understanding of a child holistically with wellbeing or attitudinal assessments. Now, these assess obviously self-reported feelings and also what we call functioning skills in the areas of self-competence. So that's your sense of how competent you are and your relationships. And again, these tests are part of that holistic overview of each student that the EEF recommends, and provides a starting point not only for further special educational needs diagnostics or investigations, but also just a teaching and learning springboard to begin from. It helps you contextualize the behaviour or the engagement and performance of the child you can see in front of you. It can contextualise data that you're getting from other sources. And if you repeat baseline assessments annually, you form an ongoing measure of progress and wellbeing monitoring, because again, wellbeing changes. We can't always anticipate the support we're going to need to give children, because the landscape, the foundations beneath us often shift in this area of special educational needs and wellbeing. So I want to try and just give you an example of what the outcomes kind of look like for students, and how they can help you to begin determining what support needs to be put in place, whether that be at the universal offer level or higher. So this is an example for a Year 9 student. It's fictitious in this instance. It's a student who's been tested for their vocabulary, their mathematics, and their non-verbal ability, as we can see on the graph. And then we've also got reported standardized scores for all three of those modules, as well as an overall ability score just on the end of the graph there. Now, baseline assessment data is a bit different to other kind of assessment data, often in this area of what we call standardized scores. And a standardized score just means a raw score that has been calibrated onto a scale which enables fairer comparison for you. So in this case, the calibration is against other students of the same age in the UK, and that's based on a huge data set which Cambridge Insight have. It includes lots of historical data and statistical analysis. And how that presents itself on the graph here is we can see there's this kind of thick black line across the graph at the number 100. And so that line there is representing the average for a child of that age. And standardized scores can be a bit misunderstood, because really an average child will be scoring 100 every year. So sometimes people will look at standardized scores and say, oh my goodness, they got a standardized score of 100 last year and they've got a standardized score of 100 this year. They haven't made any progress. That's not accurate. That's not correct. It's a standardized score. So actually 100 is what we're aiming for year on year if we are looking at students with an average performance profile. Now, if we look at the scores for this student here, we can see that actually, broadly speaking, this child is quite high performing. Just about all of their scores are above the line. Their mathematics up here is a real strength. They scored 143, and that's, that strength is, really outlined there by the comparison with their non-verbal score. which is just below average at 99. Not necessarily a data point you'd be too worried about if everything else was in this area, but actually the disparity between these two here is interesting. Because what that could mean in practice is that this student is very capable with maths calculations and procedures, but maybe they struggle with problem solving or with practical tasks that involve those kind of non-verbal matching and 3D visualization skills. And that relative gap there between the two could also mean that their evaluative skills might require some support. Maybe there might be some issues with verbal or written expression skills as well there, which would be worth monitoring. And I stress might in my comments here because, as I said, this test will act as a screener. It's a first holistic look at a child's academic potential. And it is for us as the student's teacher, as the expert in instructing them, to apply the context. What signals do we see from this child in class? What do we know about their preferences and their behaviours that reinforce or potentially even contradict what we're seeing in the test? And why might that be? Those are the questions that we really need to be asking ourselves. Now, conducting a wellbeing check on the same student might give us some results like this. You know, this student has self-reported some pretty high levels of self-competence, scoring 5 out of 5 there in all questions. They feel confident in aspects of their school life and in their own sense of self and their sense of purpose. They are also reporting some quite high levels of interpersonal well-being, a sense of belonging to their social and school groups, and their life satisfaction, their contentment with themselves and with their school experience is relatively high. But it is in the negative emotions where we are reporting comparatively quite low. There is an indicator here that school stress or anxiety is something they're potentially struggling with, and those negative emotions could impact on their behaviour or their performance. Do these tests tell me definitively that I have a student requiring special educational needs support? No, they're not diagnostic tests. But for my whole cohort now, for my new year 7s, for example, I now have a starting point. I can tell these students' teachers to look out for signs of negative emotions. We can monitor those. We can be alert to any emerging needs in that space, especially as, I don't know, maybe exam stress heightens or we come to learn something about their family situation, for example. Teachers could, from the academic data on the cognitive baseline assessment, start to look at the students' expression skills, their problem solving, and be alert to any potential barriers to their learning there. This student may not need an individual support plan ever. Maybe they will never need one, but at least we know early enough what areas they need support with, and we have a basis for monitoring or planning for the potential further support that we think they might need. Now, in both of these examples, I've shown the results of just one child, and sometimes when we are looking at special educational needs, we do focus on individual children, quite rightly. But I think the other great thing about baseline assessments is that they can offer data profiles for whole classes or for whole year groups, and that data can be explored at that group level to identify group needs, again, supporting your teaching and learning planning, your monitoring processes in school. And data from baseline assessments can also support the evidence captured in individual support plans and even in EHCP applications as well. As I mentioned earlier, though, a baseline assessment and a wellbeing check, they're just one part of the wider evidence gathering that you will be doing in schools. And knowing your students, the environments they're existing in, and using data to interrogate the questions that are thrown up from these assessments is really, really important. And I think thinking about your school processes here is really interesting. So if I give another example of a potential student profile here, maybe we have a student who is getting some low vocabulary scores in a baseline assessment, for example. And that baseline assessment might have been conducted by one member of staff or a particular department in school. And so there's an awareness of that low vocabulary in one area. But maybe somewhere else, another department or another member of staff is responsible for the wellbeing assessment. And so they're noticing that this child has low competence or low school satisfaction. because they're the ones conducting the wellbeing assessment. And then our attendance teams might know that this same child has got quite erratic attendance across different subjects. And maybe another team altogether also knows that there's quite regular misbehaviour from this child. And that might be across all subjects, or it might be in specific ones. So some teachers are aware of the misbehaviour and maybe others aren't. And I think understanding that we do operate in environments where we have lots and lots of data, and that data might be spread out and it might not be known by everybody, can sometimes open us up to gaps. So actually we need to be aware that we've got different sources and systems within school which are capturing these insights about children, and we need to try and build profiles in one place of each child so we can always collate the best data, the most relevant and recent data, and make a plan. And in this case, that plan may not be it may not need to be significant. Maybe we want to explore a literacy diagnostic test. Maybe we need to put a pastoral support plan in place. Maybe we need some family liaison. Maybe we need all three. But the point here is that we have to really be on top of our data, and keeping it together, collating it for our children to make sure that we are making the best of it and enabling it to lead us to this whole principle of early intervention and early action. So for us at Cambridge Insight, a two-step approach to assessment is really key to ensuring that universal offer, that quality first teaching, is as supportive as it can be, potentially then reducing the need for higher numbers of targeted support if it's done really well. And that's, as we say, because those screener baseline assessments can give us a lot of insight to help get that quality first teaching provision right, and targeted to the students who are in front of us as well. We know that not all needs are easily identified, and as advocated by the EEF and the DFE, we are all special educational needs teachers, and if we don't see ourselves in that way, then we probably need to, because of that shifting landscape and that changing nature of special educational needs provision. And whilst we need to recognise that some support does come from intervention outside the classroom, of course it does, and that needs to be organised by teachers who are specialists in those areas, there is actually a great deal that we can do in our teaching to support special educational needs, which benefits all children. And I know those of us who've been in education a long time know that. Sometimes it can get lost in the the stress and the overwhelm of school environments, but it's a really, really crucial thing to kind of hold on to and remember in our schools, because inclusive strategies can be so easily implemented. Things like wait time, across an entire school, we should all have wait time, 3 to 5 seconds, which sometimes feels like a dreadfully long time, but is so important to everybody's cognitive processing. Gives everybody time to think and formulate and let that question settle and come up with an answer. Teacher-led reading. As a former literacy coordinator, sometimes despairing of how little some teachers will read aloud to their students, really crucial cross-curricular strategy that supports all needs and all learners. And using talk or writing stems, these are just simple techniques that can be applied across the curriculum, and they support all learners for the better. We did produce this kind of little flyer, which you can see on the side there. We'll try and get the link out to you at the end in case that's of interest at all. But it's not an exhaustive list, but it's a list of kind of those easy to implement important things that all of us can do to make our classrooms more inclusive. Delivering on a kind of universal offer and ensuring it really does support as many children as possible, of course, is going to come down to staff training and CPD. It's not going to be possible to make everyone a specialist literacy teacher or an expert in autism spectrum disorder, but we can support all teachers to be inclusive teachers, to consider the needs of the children in front of them, and to really support them with strategies that will have positive consequences. Now, the graphic that you can kind of see on screen at the moment, this kind of map here, is effectively a series of descriptors for commonly observable presentations in children, of some of the potential challenges that they might face in their learning. And we can just use this as a kind of list to just ask ourselves what we're seeing in our students, what we're seeing behaviourally, what we're observing about their concentration and attention, how their executive functions are manifesting, what their literacy and numeracy is like. And we could just spend some time asking ourselves what we're seeing across our classes and consider the impact that they're having on learners. We're taking a massive step forward to just being consciously inclusive, I think. And often, as well, when we notice these things, the presentations can overlap, and so do the solutions. So, for example, if I take the box here around behaviour, if I notice a child who's not really able to regulate their behaviour, that is going to be having an impact on their concentration and their attention. So if I can tackle that behaviour regulation, I might also benefit the concentration and attention span there as well. And we know that these things are intrinsically linked, but sometimes we just don't take the time to see that kind of holistic picture. Sometimes we just focus on the one thing, and stepping back a little bit and taking some time. And that's the key thing. The thing that we wish we could give all of our staff is more time, but being able to find that time and carve that out could really change the face of inclusive teaching in something like a universal offer. And then, considering one or two key things that we might be able to address or we might be able to implement, which could help in these areas, trialing that, and, really proactively responding to student needs, boosting that universal offer could go a long way to reducing the other kinds of interventions that might be needed. Now, remembering that speech, language and communication skills, as we saw at the start of the presentation, they're some of the most common educational needs. Knowing also that at secondary, around 25% of our students on average will not be at age expected reading levels. Is embedding strategies that support literacy can be really, really beneficial to boosting that universal provision, that universal offer. I'm going to showcase a couple here. We're going to talk about dual coding, situation models, some reading strategies, and they are cross-curricular strategies, but I don't pretend that this is an exhaustive list at all. These are just some kind of easy to implement ideas that might be worth thinking about in your contexts. So as a reminder, dual coding, something's been around for a very long time. It's a strategy whereby effectively information is presented in multiple formats. So it could be written text alongside images, it could be some diagrams, it could be multimedia such as videos, it could be hands-on kind of practical tasks with manipulatives in the classroom. And the aim of this strategy really is to offer sort of different vehicles for taking on board information, but reducing students' cognitive load. So, for example, a child with low reading attainment, we might hand them an instruction sheet in science for completing a scientific process or setting up an experiment. Now, if their cognitive load is taken up with actually decoding those instructions, their ability to perform the process and learn from it is somewhat stifled there. Now, we could read the instructions out loud, and that might go some way to helping. But the student would probably also benefit from a video explanation of that scientific process. And actually, all children in the room would benefit from that because they'd see an example in front of them through the video of how this works. And then they'd also have those backup instructions that you've given them in place there. So this dual boost effectively to what is effectively the encoding, the storing, and then the retrieval of this information in the memory starts to embed itself because multiple versions of the same information are becoming stored together in the brain. They're offering then the potential for multiple prompt mechanisms. So we might read something and that will prompt it, but we might also see something visual that will prompt a reminder in our brains as well. Now, the example on screen here, we can see a little bit of written content there about DNA. And then we've just got the visual of the double helix next to it. But that would be so much better supported for all students if there's maybe a 3D model in the classroom or some kind of puzzle that they can put together to actually build a double helix, or if there's a video or some kind of audio description that they could listen to there. It's just offering them different ways to access the same information. Situation modelling is kind of similar. Again, it's about creating situational maps or ideas in the mind. And again, a similar tool to supporting students in accessing content, particularly if it's in written form. Because by supporting reading with visual models, diagrams, sometimes maybe process maps, we support them making sense of what might potentially be very complex sentences. So this is an example of mine, having been an English teacher. English GCSE text in the UK is An Inspector Calls, and the start of that play includes a very lengthy description of the set and the arrangement of the characters. For learners with low reading skills or with processing needs, this visual just supports their orientation and their understanding of the text. And it just enables them to then pursue deeper levels of thought beyond trying to work out from a very lengthy piece of writing where the characters are sat. Now they can consider why they might be sat in that way, for example. And that leads me quite nicely onto reading strategies, which is obviously a passion of mine. And I'm lifting straight from the very great Alex Quigley here with Closing the Reading Gap. But looking at that data about SPLC needs being one of the most common needs in the UK, knowing about that 25% of children arriving at secondary without age expected reading levels, knowing that conditions like dyslexia affect at least 1 in 10 children and dyslexic tendencies likely to be higher, we have to think about reading, really think about it. Because again, this is all about cognitive demand. If you're assessing reading, then great, you choose one-to-one reading with a child. But if reading is just the vehicle into your learning content, asking a random child to read something out loud in the middle of class is fraught with challenge. It can really exacerbate certain educational needs or the behaviours associated with them in those children. So, teachers should be reading content out loud to the whole class by default, because they can model fluency, they can model pace, they can model intonation, they give everybody the chance to understand that content audibly. And there are techniques like choral reading, where you ask a group of children or the whole class to read something out loud as a group, or echo reading, where you say something or read something and you ask them to read it back to you. They're really powerful for supporting all children, regardless of their need, to learn and retain key information whilst boosting those speech and communication skills. And just on the topic of speech and communication, we know that this is another kind of really important area that's getting some more attention at the moment. The significance of oracy on learning, but specifically on speech, language and communication needs as well. We all benefit, I think, as teachers from being aware of oracy teaching and oracy support. Cambridge actually, in Cambridge International, have lots of free resources on this on their website. Again, I'm sure we can supply links if that's of relevance to anybody. But understanding that learning can happen both through talk and by talking, really crucial to helping us determine how we might build classrooms that foster positive talk cultures, and making sure that we're formalizing our own talk to show students how they can do the same. That's really crucial to that universal offer and to inclusion and access for all, as long as it's scaffolded. And because, talk then takes us into writing. And that's the other really key thing there. We can support a number of processing and SPLC needs through oracy strategies. This is an example of a really easy way to quickly embed talk into a science classroom. We often provide students with sentence starters for writing, but we can do the same for speech. So we can make talk formal. And then when talk becomes formal, writing can become formal. And there's a cultural acceptance within our classrooms that this is the way we talk as well. And again, that just boosts that universal offer. And I absolutely could go on for days about inclusive teaching principles. I won't. I am no authority on the subject. There are plenty of fantastic teachers, leaders, researchers, consultants, writers, all out there who can support us with those things. Though I would always recommend looking in your own school first, because there's always practice within our schools to kind of really inspire us and to admire there and to share and get everybody on board with when we're thinking about that universal offer. But I will bring this session to a close at this point for questions, just by agreeing really, the recent DFE white paper says early intervention is key. I think it is. Ensuring a robust and fit for purpose educational offer for all students is crucial to supporting everybody, but that investment in a two-step assessment process alongside that quality kind of training and CPD for our staff, will hopefully bring about some benefits that enable our schools and all of our students to thrive regardless of their background there. So I will pause there. I think Lucy is going to come back to us in case of any questions. I can see her popping up now.
Hi.
Yes, we can hear you, Lucy. Yeah,
that's right. Annie, you were fabulous. Thank you so much. I told you guys were in for a treat. So what a load of information. It was so helpful. Thank you so much. Really, really helpful. Lots and lots of information there. And we have had quite a few questions. And the first one is from Wayne. Wayne is a deputy head in a primary school, and he's got some really good questions. And the first one was, how can we build staff confidence around identifying SEND and needs? And do you know what? That's such a good question. We could probably do a whole webinar on it, I expect.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try and keep the answer to that short. I think it depends on the context. So much of anything we do in teaching comes from experience, doesn't it? And our exposure and our work with children over time. In this instance, when we're talking about using a formalized assessment like a baseline assessment as some kind of screener, I think the investment really is in who's going to use those results. Is it one person in the school who's then going to share that information more widely, or are you going to give access to these kinds of results to all staff? Depending on the mode you choose, again, you've got to invest the time in the training. If you used a baseline assessment from someone like Cambridge Insight, training is available. There are other assessment providers who I know do the same. So, assessment providers try really hard to make this kind of data accessible. But as I try to say in the assessment as well, it's one thing to take the data and it's another to contextualize that around the child. That test doesn't know your child. It knows how the child has responded in that moment on that day, and you have to bring your expertise to that. So for me, really, the answer to the question is know your kids. But how do you build that confidence? It's through decent training, pairing teachers up, getting great mentors in, and just giving them, I think, and this is almost the impossible ask in schools, but just the time and the space to just take a moment to reflect on what they're seeing and ask questions. And I think, ask questions in a group forum as well, putting that support in place to really kind of just help people get curious and think, is this something I need to do something about? Or, is there something specialist here? Or will some targeted teaching and learning strategies work?
Amazing answer. I would have said exactly the same thing. It's all about training, and it's about allowing your team to feel like they're trusted and that they can come to you with a genuine question that they don't know the answer to, and feel like they'll be supported along that journey. And that does take time to build. It's not something that happens instantly. So if you're new to your role, or your school is just coming around to new ideas and new systems in place, it can take a little bit of time to build that kind of relationships up so that people feel able to ask questions. But great question. Thank you, Wayne. And then Wayne also asked us, Annie, how do we collect evidence for Ofsted? There's lots of questions about worrying about inspection right now, Annie. I don't know if you've noticed it yourself, but we've got a new framework come through. There's lots of new stuff on there about inclusion. What's your ideas in terms of, let me just make sure I'm asking Wayne's question correctly. How do we make sure we've got enough evidence to impact for Ofsted beyond provision mapping and data? So that's a great
question. It's a great question. I'm not going to pretend I am wholly clued up on everything on that new list from Ofsted. I've been through obviously several Ofsteds in my time and had to present, literacy or SEND related data to them. I think it's there's a difference between saying here's some data I have and thinking about what that's communicated to us and what we've done about it. I think there is sometimes a worry that bad data is going to reflect badly on the school, but actually in my experience, I know lots of people have had negative experiences, but in my experience the focus has always been on what we're doing. So I've had schools where more than 25% of my year 7s can't read to the expected levels, and that doesn't look great. But look, these are the things that we're doing, and this is the progress we've seen so far. And again, I think I kind of mentioned it in the previous answer as well. It's all about adding that context to the data. The data is just a set of numbers. We need the story behind it, and you're the only person that knows that because you work with these children or it's your school that you're a part of. So I think when you're preparing for Ofsted, and I know they don't give you a great amount of time, but it's about having that data so that you can easily access it. But when was the last time you interacted with it? How often are you kind of reviewing your data there? And it's something we talk about, is trying to make some assessments regular so you can monitor progress, or you can see, what's changing in terms of your student trends, and then potentially knowing why, or knowing how your whole team as a school are reacting to that data. To try and map out what's important. So it's a really waffly response to quite a big question there.
You answered it really well, and in a way you did exactly what I was about to do. We answer that with a question like, are you doing what's working, and how do you know? And this is exactly where Cambridge Insight comes in beautifully with that, because you've got evidence, and you've got information that tells you where the child is needing more support, and you can show impact from that starting point. That's exactly a very good example of how to get that evidence for Ofsted. One thing I will say, Wayne, I'm not sure if this is what you're doing, but I bet there's a lot of people out there who are thinking like this too. So if you are, don't worry. I'm sure it's a very common feeling, because we get a lot of questions like this. They think that they have to do a separate file or a separate evidence bank for Ofsted alongside their normal file for inclusion. The answer to that is definitely don't. Just do what you normally do. Ofsted are coming in to see what you normally do. They're very specific in saying, we don't want to create any more extra workload. My answer to that is, make sure that you have what you need to explain what's working and how you know it's working, and how regularly you check. If you're doing interventions as a result of some insight information, how do you know those interventions are working? What evidence have you got? How often are you checking those things? So that's my response to that. And then we had Jane. I think we answered your question as a presentation went on. If we haven't, please do come back to us and we'll help you with that. But we're talking about distinguishing gaps in literacy with different needs, and I think we kind of that in the presentation. And Sonia's asked, what does strong adaptive teaching look like in a primary classroom? That's a great question, because people worry, we all worry, don't we, Annie? Are we doing it right?
Are we doing it right?
Is this what everybody else is doing? There's a big worry, isn't there?
Worry, and I think sometimes we're the victims of our own success, because we've got so many teachers who are great at this, sharing this information, sharing their techniques and their strategies, and there are loads to choose from. You could spend a day talking about the different things that you've done that worked with some children, not worked with others, and those kinds of things. And in some ways, it's my favorite thing about teaching, is that one size doesn't fit all, but it is also a real challenge, when you have a diverse group of children with different needs. For me, strong adaptive teachers are teachers who say what is working, what is not working, and when I've identified what is not working, what could I do? What can I change? How can I, potentially, fill a gap or make this this a more supportive environment, or something, making this work. And it's also, I think sometimes about having the courage to say, do you know what, I've tried this technique that maybe someone's recommended to me, or maybe I've read about, and it isn't working. So I'm going to stop doing that now, and I'm going to try something else. And I think sometimes we worry about that because we think there's going to be a detrimental impact on the children. And I would say, generally speaking, that's not the case. But I think, that there is more madness in sticking with something that isn't working than in trying something new sometimes as well. So I think it's not about strong adaptive teaching. It's about strong adaptive teachers who have been given the support and the tools and have got the people around them to just really look at their class and say, okay, this is a gap or a problem I want to address. How do I do that? Have I already got a suggestion? Can I reach out to someone else who might have some expertise there and a way to help me? And how long am I going to try this for? And really, really commit to that before being able to review it.
Superb. The head teacher chat community are very lucky to have had you here today, Annie.
Thanks.
Honestly, I'm sure that's helped a lot of leaders out there. And don't forget, if you've still got questions, and you've got Annie's email up on the screen right now. You can, well, I don't know if it's your email, is it, Annie? Or...
No, that's our Insight one. Yeah.
General Insight email is up on the screen, insights@cambridge.org. Please do get in touch with them if you've got any questions about the product specifically. If you've got any other inclusion questions or any questions generally, don't forget you can post them in the community chat. Just put new post and type your question, choose where you'd like it to go, community chat, and then press submit, and we'll all be able to help you. So that's what the community is there for. It's about us helping each other in a very professional space, just school leaders in it. So it's a fun place to be. So if you haven't asked a question yet and you think you're brave enough to do so, please do use that space. It's there for you to tap into. So thank you so much, Annie, for joining us today. We really, really enjoyed the session. We've all learned so much, and I'm definitely going to be checking out Cambridge Insights. I don't know about you guys. And I know you'll send over the links, will you, Annie? Or
yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we can send to you if that's helpful, and you can get that around. Yeah.
Cool. So if you're watching this on demand, the links will be underneath the video. If you're watching this live, wait until the video is in the library, and then I'll put them underneath the video for you. So thank you so much, everybody, and have a lovely day.
Thank you. Bye.